it's not exactly like what was going on in the rest of the culture. The rest of the culture was simply barbaric in many respects. It was like living in Game of Thrones, and you don't want to do that. So I think in order to understand that a little better, we need to see that point of view, which is not the Bible's point of view. Okay, so could you put up slide 2, please? A barbarian is going to explain it.
You want me to keep going? I'll go.
Sure, you're doing a fine job.
Okay. If you go out to war against, the greatest pleasure in life the greatest pleasure in life is to vanquish your enemies and chase them before you, to rob them of their wealth and see that those dear to them bathed in tears, to ride their horses and to clasp to their bosom their wives and daughters. Genghis Khan, genuine certified barbarian.
Okay. So we listened to Mr. Khan. And what does he say? Somebody paraphrase him, please. Come on.
Okay.
It's almost humiliation for to do to your enemies. I mean, treat them as cattle for the women, and then take their possession and dehumanize them.
Right, and dehumanize them would probably come first, because they don't distinguish wives, daughters, mothers. Doesn't make any difference. They're female creatures, but they're certainly not on any par with real people. So seems that the Bible story might be a little bit better. Now, if you compare the two, what's the difference in the Bible, even though you wind up with the same result?
Well, it's an element of humanity in the Torah portion in terms of her treatment. To observe her, take some consideration to her a weeping period, and treat, if she should be rejected, treating her with some modicum of respect. However, I would point out, Rabbi, that this is not the only portion in the Torah in which women are treated as chattel or with contempt in treatment of women. It is a troubling conversation. It really is.
All right, is it legitimate, and I'm just questioning, is it legitimate to be troubled by something that was the norm in a previous age, but we have since evolved out of? In other words, is it, if someone told you the ancient Romans had slaves, could anybody have stopped that?
No, the point is very well taken. The point is very well taken. If you can adopt context as a part of the study of Torah, then it is a reasonable argument. Unfortunately, we live in a world in which a lot of this is taken literally, and that's tragic.
Yeah, and I think you have to look at it is in this sense, you're looking at commodities, right? As I think was said, cattle, horses, women, are they a commodity, or because women are looked at hopefully differently, are they there with more values? If you want to take this all the way up to all of our lives where we've grown up with people and we all have friends who sees, you called it the trophy wife, they see girlfriends for one thing and one thing only, beauty and to be with them. Other ones see their inner self, who they are, what they like. And I think some of this mentality, carries over to different respects, and we try to put it in proper perspective.
Very much, very much. And you're asking all the right questions. That's great. I think, where there seems to be a pervasive injustice in society and it gets fixed, we can understand that this is part of a long developmental process and not simply what happened yesterday. The Bible story really is better because, first of all, it says, and if you would consider marrying her, right? If you would consider marrying her. So that's a consideration. It doesn't say she's going to, but it's a consideration. Secondly, there's some humane treatment here because she's given a month to adjust to her new situation. You know, she's going to get dolled up a little bit too. She's going to get a manicure, it tells us, and some new clothes, and she won't look like a captive, but at least she is treated like a person. And we don't have that elsewhere. So I think the Bible did, as it often does, improve the norm for their neighborhood.
But Rabbi, there's an issue we haven't discussed yet. The one point that was made, she could let her nails grow. There's a real message in letting her nails grow. In terms of the way I see it, and she was required to do work which really wore down the nails. To let her nails go is really a message of a different position in life.
Right. In other words, she had to be elevated to something approximately where the man was. Yeah. Closer. All right, we've got a lot of stuff, so I'm going to keep going if we've wrung that one out. So slide number 3 is the case of the despised wife. You know, that one's going to require some explanation. Someone read, please.
If a man has, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm clear.
If a man has 2 wives, one beloved and the other despised, and they bear him sons, the beloved one and the despised one, and the firstborn is from the despised. Then it will be on the day he, the husband, bequeaths his property to his sons, that he will not be able to give the son of the beloved wife birthright precedence over the son of the despised wife, the real firstborn son. Rather, he must acknowledge the firstborn, the son of the despised wife, and give him a double share in all that he possesses, because he, this firstborn son, is the first of his strength. Then he has the birthright entitlement.
Yeah. Yeah. This is so important. It's so terribly important. But first of all, we have to resolve the first thing. If a man has 2 wives, one loved and one unloved, or despised, or whatever, however you want to phrase it. What excuse is there for in those days for anybody to tolerate somebody that they despise or don't love? Because if women, as our previous discussion indicated, resemble chattel, then you just move the chattel. But that's not the case, because there are relationships that are formed. And especially every commentary on this text points to the same thing, and that is Jacob and Rachel and Leah.
Right.
Because Leah was the one, if you remember, who he got as a prize for the first 7 years, and it was the wrong prize. And then the second 7 years, he worked for Rachel, and he loved her, and she was the one he loved to begin with. But we're not even sure that the word love means the same thing in the biblical context as it does today. You know, we are influenced by something called romantic love. Romantic love is, you know, is sung by the troubadours, and, you know, it was idolizing the women, and love in those days may have meant something else, but we're not exactly sure, and we have nobody to ask, so we'll just have to guess. But here there's also an issue of inheritance. Now, what's the difference if you're the firstborn or not?
Firstborn gets the birthright. You get
Right.
everything.
Right, it's the law of primogeniture. The firstborn. And the first one does not get everything. Not in the Bible system. The first one gets a double portion. Double portion. The others aren't cut out. In Western society, so I take England as an example, or France, or Germany, where you have royalty established for a long time. The firstborn son is the one who's going to inherit not only wealth but title, and not only title but position. So it's absolutely essential that somebody be named to that. At the time of the American Revolution, the Marquis de Lafayette was here. I'm not sure what sequence he was in the birth order, but I guarantee he wasn't number one, because number one wouldn't have been sent out, allowed to go to such a dangerous place. In England, the number one inherits what? Everything. 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 And the others get nothing. So the revolution here had lots of second, third, fourth, fifth born nobility fighting because they had nothing to lose. They were building a career as a soldier. All you have to do is you watch Hamilton, you'll understand that. And
Rabbi, wasn't
the firstborn not only maintained social stability by taking over his father's position, but he also preserves the estate. The estate doesn't get split up. In biblical times, there weren't big estates, but in the modern world, there are, and it was essential that the property be kept together. That is a basic thing. So,
Rabbi, wasn't that one of the deals in the Crusades, that the nobility sons that were not firstborn, they kind of promised them, whatever you capture for land, have a great time. So you got these nobility sons, just like you said, out. And what do? They pillaged and raped and plundered and took women. But they went out to find lands that they were going to be given to have if they could conquer them. Right.
Then you look for a dowry and the best deal.
Yep, exactly.
No question about it. I have an observation that's never been borne out. Maybe in my spare time I'll write a paper on it or something. But
Rabbi,
let me just make my point before I forget it. Over my lifetime, I have met a lot of twins. People, are any of you twins? A twin? No. Okay. I decided that the one thing that's absolutely fascinating to me about twins is that they never, ever forget who was born first, even if it's by 2 minutes. And they lord it over the other one,
Right.
for their whole life.
my grandsons are 7 minutes apart. The older one never lets the younger one forget that.
My point exactly. So, that that tells you there's something that is important here. There's a ceremony.
What about Jacob and Esau?
Yeah, exactly.
Twins.
Yes.
Well, there you have the field of sibling rivalry, which also
Who got what?
Sibling rivalry also has its
Who
points.
got what? And who was loved and who wasn't loved?
There's one other point I'd like to bring out. The despised wife versus the other wife. The firstborn has nothing to do with how the father feels about the woman. The firstborn takes precedent over his feelings about the despised woman or the not despised woman. The message here is the firstborn conquers all, independent of who the woman is and the man's feeling about the woman. That's the way I read it.
Right, but what was the difficulty in the case of Jacob? What was he doing with Benjamin?
That was his favorite son.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he treated him as if
He was
he
first.
were the firstborn.
Yeah,
He's the baby.
But he wasn't.
he was a baby.
He was the baby, yeah. And the firstborn was Reuben,
But it was,
clearly, chronologically, yes.
it was Joseph, though, that was considered the firstborn, not Benjamin.
Mhm.
The
There's a ceremony, a traditional ceremony. Reformed Jews generally ignore it, but it's called Pidyon Haben, the redemption of the firstborn.
Yep.
Yep.
And can somebody explain that?
Right.
You have to go to a corn, I think, to buy it. Well,
Right.
I'm not very, to buy it for
Right. The firstborn,
Yeah, it's not buying.
the
it's rental.
firstborn properly,
rental.
firstborn properly belonged to God, not
Yeah.
to his parents. He was indebted to God. And by redeeming him, the Pidyon Ben, you basically buy him back from God, so he's yours again.
Uh-huh.
You can keep him.
but it has to be through a corn. This was done in my family. I never quite understood why, but in my my parents did that with their children.
Mhm.
My
Interesting.
father got quite wealthy redeeming firstborns.
And it's a token.
Really, that's pretty good. We're not going to answer the phone.
No, it's not ours.
In the ceremony, the child is described as Peter Rechem, the one who opens the womb, the first to be born, and obviously that's really, really important. So, does firstborn have? Is there any characteristic that you would attach to the eldest or the firstborn?
You mean physically or authoritatively or in what way?
Personality. What are they like?
Responsible.
More outgoing.
Responsible. Responsibility is their middle name. They are the most obedient, the most compliant, the most responsible, and the one who feels responsible for the younger ones. When our kids were small, we have a daughter and a son in that order. And when our daughter was probably 3 years old or something like that, she would come in and say to Jane or to me, "Our baby is hungry." And we would tell her, "Debbie, it's not our baby, it's your brother." "No, our baby is hungry." So she owned him. And I don't know if that's changed very much now that they're in their 50s. We'll see. Anyway, it's something to bear in mind. There are characteristics that carry over, and there's a lesson in this too. So let's go to the next case about bodies. We're going to get into burial customs and things. Slide 4. Who's reading? Volunteer, Dr. Little.
Okay, if a man commits a sin for which he is sentenced to death, and he is put to death, you shall then hang him on a pole. But you shall not leave his body on the pole overnight. Rather, you shall bury him on that same day, for a hanging human corpse is a blasphemy of God. And you shall not defile your land, which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance.
Okay. What's your immediate response to that?
Well, it's very humane because the Romans, when they crucified people, they would leave that body on the cross for months as a deterrent to anyone else. And they began to smell, etc. But in Judaism, they have to be buried the same day because dust has to return to dust. and they can't return to dust if it's hanging on a cross.
Mhm.
It's also respect for the body.
That seems to me the origin of burying our dead immediately or within the first day. I'm
Well,
kind of
it's
surprised. I
respect-
didn't know where it came from.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's respect for the body if that's how you want to interpret it. But, you know, I'm thinking of in Moscow in the Kremlin, they have, I don't know if it's still like that, but they had Lenin's tomb.
Yeah, he's still there.
He's still there. Okay. And he looks like the day before he died. And you know, he may be a wax Madame Tussauds mask. We don't know what it is. But
He's
long
got
lines
gas.
of people, long lines of people file by to pay their respect, and they say, "Boy, he looks good."
I have a question.
He looks like he's sleepy.
Okay, Jane has a question.
Do any of the commentators discuss capital punishment in the first place? Because if it's the defilement of the human body to leave it up on the hanging, why have capital punishment?
Why don't they have a discussion about capital punishment the way we do?
Do they?
No, because it's a given. It's a given. You take someone's life, you've given up yours. That's all. Pure and simple.
So the body is sacred even of a criminal. The human-
Exactly.
the body.
And that's what I put in my note. Not a body is sacred, even a criminal's dead body.
Yeah.
So I think maybe, probably there probably was some hygienic basis for this too, because you don't want bodies lying around putrefying. At least not where people are living and drinking the water and things like that. So it's a given that capital punishment is murder is murder. But interestingly, in the Bible, killing is not murder. Killing can take place by accident. Killing can take place legally. For example, if you're a soldier, you have a legal basis for killing, and nobody's going to call you a murderer. But if you break the rules of the Geneva Convention, or you break the rules in some other way, then killing could turn to murder. But again, you see, the importance of Torah law in this case is, again, what it later becomes. I mean, nobody 3,000 years ago said funeral has to be the same day. They didn't. I don't know if they had funerals. I don't know what they did. But we do. And it's Jewish practice and Jewish custom, not just custom, to not delay a burial if it's at all possible. Now,
Muslims also.
Yeah, Muslims too. Well, they've been very influenced by us. They don't want to admit it, but they were.
Yeah. Rabbi, in 1956, the Syrians captured an Israeli Mossad agent who had penetrated their own intelligence, and they hanged him. And they left his body for at least 3 days, I guess for the purpose of further demeaning him and going against their own traditions and the traditions of Judaism, and also to teach a lesson about the high cost of spying.
Mm-hmm. As an example, I've got another example I'm going to show you in a minute. They certainly did that as a way of sending a message. You're talking about Eli Cohen, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
There was, for those who are interested in that story, there's actually, I believe it was on Netflix with Sacha Baron Cohen. It's I think a 6-part series on Eli Cohen. Very, very well done. Personally, my husband's grandmother was actually, my husband's from Syria, and his grandmother was actually there the day of the hanging of Eli Cohen, and he looked at her, and she had tears in her eyes. She obviously couldn't make it clear that she was sad for his hanging, but it's a memory that she passed down to my husband.
Rabbi, I have a question. It relates to a Jewish custom of a family member or a representative sitting by a dead body until it is buried. Now, is that part of this issue of respect for the dead body?
Definitely is. It's also a protection against body snatchers, which might have been a problem at some time. But there is a custom as a sign of respect, really, to never leave. It's not sitting with. It's never leaving the body alone from the time it dies to the time it gets buried. But that's all medieval Jewish law. And we know that funeral practices change. For example, Joseph in Egypt, his last will and testament said, don't leave my bones in this place. And so they put his bones into an ossuary, which is a box for bones, and they took him back home with them when they left Egypt. Now, how do you get a box of bones? That does not happen overnight. So they may have made it happen overnight. We don't know. Or maybe bones means body, not sure. But we know that was a different funeral practice, and it was probably influenced by the Egyptians. We know that Jews stayed away from cremation. There are lots of reasons. I have my theories. What do you think? Why? Yeah, Lydia.
It's more of a question. Isn't that because they want or they believe that the resurrection, the Christ would need the full body to? There's a concept of of Christ coming back, and therefore, or the Christ, a second incarnation, whatever it's called, and you need to have a full body for that. That's why Jews don't believe in cremation.
Yeah.
On Messiah, I meant the Messiah.
I understood you. Yeah. Okay, anybody else?
Yeah, you are made of earth and your body is supposed to return to the earth.
Okay, well, why can't it return to the earth as pure carbon?
I don't believe that's, you're changing the substance itself. I think that's the way the rabbis would interpret it.
Right.
My remember on this was your body is supposed to be buried intact, but then wasn't there some years ago this great discussion now that we had organ donation, and then you went to save a life by donating your body, and which had a higher calling? And I just remember an issue coming up with great rabbinical arguments on that.
There were great rabbinical arguments. The one who won was Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who was a great Orthodox authority, and his conclusion was we don't do organ donation except for corneal transplants. I don't know why. He said, but if you know that your organ donation is going to save a particular person, and that person is going to receive it, and you know that person or about that person, then it's okay. So it really, really is interesting. It depends a lot.
Rabbi, let me just add one thing. When you have an autopsy, the pieces parts don't all go back in.
Mm-hmm. Right. And also, they probably didn't understand that blood is an organ too, but, if that could be saved, I guess it should have been. And modern Orthodoxy does believe that and practice it. But anyway, part of the rationale to my thinking is that Jews didn't use cremation because the Romans did, or whoever else was the Romans. They didn't want to be like everybody else. They wanted to maintain their separate and distinct practice. Use of coffins, a casket. In Israel, they don't use caskets. the body is wrapped and lowered into the grave. And it facilitates decomposition. In fact, the Shulchan Aruch said that if you're going to use a casket, it should be out of plain wood, and you should bore holes in the bottom. Again, for the same reason, to facilitate. So the funeral practice in Naples today would be frowned upon, namely lowering the casket into a concrete vault that surrounds it, and because that would slow down the process of absorption. But I think my thinking has always been, I'm looking out my window, I'm looking at a palm tree, and I'm saying, okay, if I died tomorrow and you buried me under that palm tree, how many years would it take before I'm feeding that palm tree? And I like the idea of recycling in nature. And that's my argument for burial. It feels right to me. It seems right to me. But then again, you know, we live in Florida, and we live in an area where many people retire to, and it's more complicated because, you know, I've had this conversation dozens of times with people. Rabbi, if I get buried in the cemetery and they put up a stone, who's going to come visit me? You know, so why not just eliminate all that and send a little box with the ashes up north? I had an amazing experience when I first started in the rabbinate. I got a phone call from a woman who said, I'm getting married. And I said, Mazel tov. And she said, I have a problem. What's the problem? Problem is my first husband. So how is he a problem? He said, well, he's in the closet. I said, what do you mean he's in the closet? He's in a box in the closet. She cremated him, but she kept the ashes. And I don't think it's right to keep my first husband in this apartment with my new husband. Do you think so? I said, no, I don't think it's a great idea. So.
I know someone who had her husband cremated, but he was a sailor and he wanted the ashes spread at sea. And when they did it, the wind was blowing the wrong way.
Right. Mel Brooks has a routine like that. Let's look at slide number 5 here. I'll just give you a chuckle. See how civilization advances.
I'll read it for you. Oliver Cromwell, having been given the title of Lord Protector of England, abolished the English monarchy with the execution of Charles I. Cromwell died on September 3rd, 1658 in Whitehall Palace. When the throne of England was restored under Charles II, it was decided that Cromwell should be tried for treason. Sadly, he was already dead. So his body, or someone's body, was exhumed from the grave, given a proper trial, and publicly hanged in a posthumous execution. His body was then cast into a pit. His head was removed and mounted on a long pike. It was displayed in Whitehall until 1685. The royalists had their revenge.
Like that. 17th century progress, right? Well, that can't happen in Judaism. And I have one more comment. Again, it's just a quick personal experience. I once gave, when I was a young man, I gave a sermon on Purim. And I said that they hung Haman from the same gallows that they had prepared for Mordecai. And this woman came up to me afterward and she handed me a note. And it said, quote, "My dear Rabbi, pictures are hung, people are hanged. I am an English teacher." I haven't forgotten that. Okay. So since we don't have a whole lot of time here, I want to, I'm going to skip some of the things that I wish you'd look at if you have a text. One of them I think is extremely important, is when you build a new house, you have to make a parapet. That's like a railing along the outer edge of the roof. It's like a solid railing. The roofs are flat, and people use their roof like a lanai. They sometimes ate out there, they sometimes slept out there, they sometimes entertained out there with or without social distancing.
Hung the laundry.
And they hung the laundry there too, probably. Right. And that's the obligation of the homeowner, so he does not bring bloodshed on his house. And that has a lot of ramifications for real estate. What constitutes owner negligence? You know, if you dig a hole, you have to mark it carefully so nobody walks into it. And if they do walk into it, then you're responsible. There are all kinds of things like that. And then there are a lot of penalties for rape and adultery. There are rules about cleanliness. And one thing that jumped out at me was that if someone is an escaping slave, you have to help them, which is surprising to me at that time, but that depends on what you want your society to look like. So the last thing we're going to do, slide 6, please, is what are we going to do about the poor? Okay. Somebody.
You shall not withhold the
You
wages.
shall not withhold the wages of a poor or destitute hired worker, or your brothers or of your strangers who are in your land within your cities. You shall give him his wages on his day, and not let the sun set over it. For he is poor, and he risks his life for it, so that he should not cry out to the Lord against you, so that there should be sin upon you. Fathers shall not put to death because of their sons, nor sons be put to death because of fathers. Each man shall be put to death for his own transgression. You shall not pervert the judgment of a stranger or an orphan, and you shall not take a widow's garment as security for a loan. You shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore, I command you to do this thing. When you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back and take it.
Okay,
It
hold
shall
it.
be left
This
for
is
the
the part
stranger, the
I
orphan,
want you
and
to
the
pay
widow.
very close attention to. Go ahead.
That
Sorry.
the Lord your God will bless you in all that you do. When you beat your olive tree, you shall not deglorify it by picking all its fruit after you. It shall be left for the stranger, the orphan, and the widow. When you pick the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not glean after you. It shall be left for the stranger, the orphan, and the widow. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore, I command you to do this thing.
Wow. Okay, so if you miss the corner of your field, you don't go back and scrape it out. If you're knocking the olives off your olive tree, some are going to fall off easily, some aren't. You leave the ones that aren't. If you're pressing grapes, some of them fall to the floor of the mill or whatever. Then you are responsible to leave those. And what does it do? So why does the Torah encourage a mitzvah of somebody forgetting something, forgetting to bring in the last sheaf, forgetting the olives, forgetting the grapes? And what we see is that the Torah shows real insight into human nature. Think for a minute about what would happen if the poor people had to ask for the food. This way there's no begging and no embarrassment. He does not have to ask for the forgotten food. Instead, it's instantly designated as his or hers by law, legal property. The donor and the recipient don't have to relate to each other in these capacities, and they don't. It's just against the rules for you to take all the harvest from the fields. And the rules say that any poor person can go in and take it because he's legally entitled to it. So I think there's an implied agenda here. The rules tell us a little bit about what kind of people we should be. And we should not be greedy for every last scrap in the field. It puts things in perspective. We should not delude ourselves into thinking that the fruits of our labors belong exclusively to us, especially what we take from the earth. The rule tells us to leave something on the table. In modern terms, don't worry if you don't make as much money as you thought you could. But the Hebrew text is saying, leave something for the next guy. And you are giving up something for the improvement of your society. That's what's important. And we're going to put on, what it's doing, you can see this, is it's entering into a social contract. So I did some research on social contract theory. And the best one that I like is slide number 7. It's Thomas Hobbes explaining it. And I'll read this because I'm familiar with it. No? Yeah. Hereby it is manifest that during the time men live without a common power to keep them all in awe, in other words, without a strong central government of some sort, they are in that condition which is called war. He uses the word war, he means political chaos. So if people don't have somebody to pull them together, they get chaotic. And such a war is of every man against every other man. And sometimes our culture begins to feel like that sometimes. In such condition, there is no place for industry because the fruit thereof is uncertain, and consequently no culture of the earth, culture meaning cultivation, no navigation, no use of the commodities that may be imported by sea, no commodious building, no instruments of moving and removing such things as require much force, no knowledge about the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death. And the life of man becomes solitary and poor and nasty and brutish and short. Thomas Hobbes, Leviathan, 1651.
We have no idea what he's talking about, right?
Right, of course. Talking about
no idea. No idea.
Naturally.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, wow is right. Wow is right. Now what he's doing is he's making a case for monarchy. And that really is his point. But the truth is that he could be making a case for any government that works. Any common strong government. Because what he said, if you can't keep people in line, you can't do any of these things because every one of them requires stability, right? You have to have a stable society to do import and export, to plant in September and harvest in June. You have to have that. So what the Bible is saying is that poor people are always going to be with you. And your job is not to resent them or to glorify them or even to try to change them. Some people are always going to be poor because they don't have what it takes to get ahead. And some may not want to play the game. And some may be sick or crazy or old or frail. And some might be too eccentric. Believe it or not, some may just like being who they are and don't want to be like the rest of us. There are such people. Or they may be systemically kept down, said Mrs. Perman. So we are told to help the poor because God wants us to. But here's the point here. It's not just for their sake to give them something to eat. It's also for our sake. Because who wants to live in a place where there are people dying around you, people are hungry around you, people are sick around you? You wouldn't want to live there. You would look for somewhere else. So there's a common sense here. And it's based on the same argument that's used all through this reading. Remember, you were once, right from the Haggadah. Remember, you were once slaves, strangers, in the land of Egypt. You know the heart of the stranger because you are strangers. And damn it, you should be able to empathize.
Rabbi
This be the basis of tzedakah.
I've got to cut off the meeting right now. We have a Zoom bar mitzvah that is getting ready to start.
Okay, well, anyway, this has been a pleasure, and
Thank you.
thanks for
Thank
coming.
you, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you so much,
Bye
everyone.
bye, Perman.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, we'll see everyone
Shabbat
next week.
shalom.
Shabbat
Thank you,
shalom.
Rabbi.
Shabbat shalom.